The court-appointed psychiatrist's pen trembled as I slid the final psychological evaluation across the mahogany table. Mrs. Richardson, I have to ask, where did you acquire such sophisticated clinical assessment skills? I smiled, watching my stepmother's face drain of color as she read her own diagnosis. Narcissistic personality disorder with psychotic features. Recommendation for immediate involuntary commitment. Greystone Asylum, doctor. 5 years of intensive education. My stepfather lunged forward, his chair scraping against the courthouse floor. She's manipulating you. She's the crazy one. We had her committed for a reason. Mr. Richardson, the psychiatrist said calmly, your psychological profile indicates severe paranoid delusions and antisocial behavior patterns. The evidence your stepdaughter has compiled is quite compelling. He gestured to the thick folders spread before us, each one bearing a family member's name and containing months of secretly recorded conversations, behavioral analysis, and clinical observations that would make any psychiatric resident weep with envy. My half-sister Sarah finally looked up from her own evaluation, tears streaming down her face. How? She whispered. How did you know about the voices? I leaned back in my chair, savoring this moment I'd dreamed about for 5 long years. You taught me well, you just forgot that asylums have libraries. 3 months earlier, the discharge papers felt surreal in my hands as I stood outside Greystone Asylum's towering gates. 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days since my family had me dragged away in the middle of the night, convincing everyone I was having a psychotic break after discovering my father's will. 5 years of being told I was delusional for claiming my inheritance was being stolen. 5 years of being medicated, analyzed, and broken down. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left me alive, and Greystone Asylum had an excellent library. Dr. Henley, my discharged psychiatrist, had been genuinely puzzled by my case. Miss Matthews, he'd said during our final session, in all my years of practice, I've rarely seen someone emerge from long-term commitment with such clarity. Your psychological assessments show remarkable improvement, but more than that, you display an almost uncanny understanding of psychiatric principles. I'd simply smiled and told him I was a fast learner. What I didn't tell him was that I'd spent every available moment for 5 years consuming every psychiatric textbook, clinical manual, and psychological journal in that library. I'd memorized the DSM-5 cover to cover. I'd studied case histories, treatment methodologies, and diagnostic criteria with the fervor of someone whose life depended on it. Because it had. The taxi dropped me off at the gates of Richardson Manor, the home that should have been mine. The house my biological father had built, the one he'd left to me in his will before my stepmother, Catherine, and her children convinced everyone I was mentally unstable enough to be committed. They'd moved in the day after I was taken away. I didn't ring the doorbell. I still had my key. Jesus Christ, Sarah shrieked as I walked into the living room where she was painting her nails a violent shade of red. She scrambled backward on the white leather sofa, knocking over her nail polish. Mom, she's here. Catherine appeared from the kitchen, followed by my stepfather Robert and my other half-sister Melissa. The color drained from Catherine's face when she saw me standing there, in my simple gray dress and worn coat, the only possessions I'd left Greystone with. Emma, Catherine said, her voice carefully controlled. What are you doing here? I live here, I said simply. Robert stepped forward, his chest puffed out in the same aggressive posture I remembered from my childhood. Like hell you do. This is our house now. You're not welcome here. I pulled out my phone and started an audio recording app. Could you repeat that, Robert, for the record? I said get the hell out of my house. Interesting. And Catherine, do you agree with your husband's assessment? Catherine's eyes narrowed. She'd always been the smart one, the planner. Emma, honey, you've been through so much. Why don't you go stay somewhere else while you adjust? We can discuss arrangements later. Oh, we'll be discussing arrangements very soon, I said. All of us, together. Melissa, who'd been 16 when I was committed, looked confused. Mom, why is she talking weird? I turned my attention to her, noting the telltale signs I'd learned to recognize. The rapid eye movement, the way she scratched at her arms, the slight tremor in her hands. Melissa, are you still hearing the whispers? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. The ones that tell you to hurt yourself. The ones that started when you were 14. I kept my voice clinically neutral, the way Dr. Martinez used to speak during group sessions. Do they still tell you that everyone is watching you, judging you? Shut up! Melissa screamed. Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Robert moved toward me aggressively. That's enough. You're upsetting her. Actually, Robert, I think what's upsetting her is the untreated schizoaffective disorder she's been struggling with for years. The one you've all been ignoring because it was easier to have me be the crazy one. The room fell silent except for Melissa's ragged breathing. I sat down in my father's old armchair, the one Catherine had reupholstered in hideous floral fabric. Let me tell you what I learned during my stay at Greystone. The human mind is fascinating, isn't it? The way it can construct elaborate delusions to protect itself from unbearable truths. The way entire families can enable each other's pathologies to maintain their own sense of normalcy. Sarah had stopped crying and was staring at me with something approaching fear. You sound like a doctor. Funny you should mention that. I've been thinking about medical school. I smiled. Psychiatry specifically. 2 months earlier, my plan had begun forming during those final weeks at Greystone. Dr. Henley had been so impressed with my progress that he'd started showing me clinical files, with patient names redacted, of course, asking for my insights. It was meant to be therapeutic, giving me a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Instead, it became my weapon. Miss Matthews, he'd said one afternoon, your analysis of this case is remarkably astute. Have you considered that your experiences might actually be an asset in helping others? That's when it clicked. Everything I'd learned, every painful session, every medication trial, every moment of despair, it had all been training. I'd been studying my captors from the inside, learning their language, their methods, their weaknesses, and I'd discovered something beautiful. The same techniques they'd used to have me committed could be used against them. The law was quite clear about involuntary psychiatric holds. If someone presented a clear danger to themselves or others, if they were unable to care for themselves due to mental illness, they could be held for evaluation and treatment. The standards of evidence were surprisingly low, especially if the commitment was recommended by family members who appeared concerned and credible. Family members like the ones who'd stolen my inheritance and left me to rot in an asylum. Present day, I spent the next month living in a small apartment across town, watching them, following them, learning their routines, their habits, their secrets. I installed surveillance equipment in the house during the day when they were all out, Sarah at her job at the mall, Melissa at community college, Catherine at her book club meetings, Robert at his construction business. What I discovered was even better than I'd hoped. Catherine's book club was actually where she met with her lover, Dr. James Morrison, the same Dr. Morrison who'd signed off on my commitment papers 5 years ago. Their affair had been going on for 6 years, starting before my father's death. The recordings I captured were illuminating. I still can't believe we pulled it off, Catherine moaned during one particularly passionate encounter. That little bitch actually thought she'd inherit everything. Dr. Morrison's response was equally damning. The commitment was genius, Cat. No one questions a daughter's mental health when she's claiming her dead father talks to her. Except I'd never claimed my dead father talked to me. That was a lie they'd put in the commitment papers. Robert's construction business was failing because of his gambling addiction. Another fact carefully hidden from the family. He'd been embezzling from his own company and taking out loans against the house to fund his poker habit. His mounting debts and increasingly erratic behavior were textbook signs of impulse control disorder complicated by severe depression. Sarah was self-medicating her anxiety with alcohol and prescription drugs stolen from Catherine's medicine cabinet. Her erratic work schedule and frequent absences were due to blackout episodes she couldn't remember. Classic substance abuse disorder with dissociative features. And Melissa, poor Melissa was the saddest case of all. Her psychotic episodes were getting worse, but the family was so invested in maintaining the fiction that I was the sick one, that they'd been ignoring her obvious symptoms. She'd started talking to people who weren't there, leaving food out for visitors, and writing increasingly incoherent journal entries about being followed by government agents. But the most damaging evidence came from their own mouths. I'd placed recording devices throughout the house, and what I captured was a masterclass in psychological abuse and gaslighting. They regularly discussed how to manipulate each other, how to hide their problems from outsiders, and how to maintain the lie about my mental state. The recordings from their family dinner conversations were particularly revealing. Catherine. If anyone asks about Emma, we stick to the story. She had a complete breakdown, became violent, started making crazy accusations about the will. Robert. What if she comes back? Catherine. She won't, and if she does, we'll just have her committed again. Morrison already said he'd sign the papers. Sarah. What about Melissa? She's been talking to herself again. Catherine. That's different. Melissa is just creative. Emma was genuinely dangerous. I had them. I had everything. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted them to experience exactly what they'd put me through. I wanted them to know what it felt like to be declared insane by the people who were supposed to love you. The execution. I started with Sarah. I began calling her workplace, posing as a concerned friend, reporting that she'd been drinking during lunch breaks and seemed disoriented. I planted empty bottles in her car and locker. I hired actors to approach her in public, claiming to be old friends she didn't remember, capitalizing on her alcohol-induced memory gaps to make her question her own sanity. Within 2 weeks, Sarah was suspended from work pending a mental health evaluation. Melissa was easier. I simply started visiting her at college, posing as a psychology student conducting research on creative individuals who experience unique perceptions. I encouraged her to talk about the voices, to elaborate on her paranoid thoughts, and to keep detailed journals about her experiences. Then, I anonymously forwarded copies of her most disturbing entries to her professors and the campus counseling center. The college contacted Catherine within days, expressing concerns about Melissa's mental health and recommending immediate professional intervention. Robert required a different approach. I hired a private investigator to document his gambling addiction, then began anonymously sending evidence of his debts to his business partners and clients. As his professional life crumbled, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, making wild accusations about competitors sabotaging him, and threatening people who questioned his financial practices. When he was arrested for assault after a bar fight where he'd accused another patron of being sent by the loan sharks, I was in the courtroom gallery taking notes. But Catherine was my masterpiece. I knew her affair with Dr. Morrison was her greatest vulnerability, but I needed more than just adultery to destroy her. I needed to prove she was mentally unstable. So I began gaslighting her the way she'd gaslit me. I started small. I would sneak into the house and move things around, not enough to be obvious, just enough to make her doubt her memory. I'd leave windows open that she was sure she'd closed. I'd change the temperature settings on appliances. I'd replace items in her closet with slightly different versions. Catherine began complaining to Robert that she was becoming forgetful. She started leaving herself notes, which I would alter or remove. She began checking and rechecking locks, convinced she was developing early-onset dementia like her mother. Then I escalated. I hired actors to call the house at all hours, asking for people who didn't exist. When Catherine answered, they would insist they had the right number and become increasingly agitated when she denied knowing their supposed contacts. After weeks of these calls, Catherine became convinced someone was harassing her family. I sent her anonymous letters containing intimate details about her affair with Dr. Morrison, written in the style of someone mentally unhinged. The letters contained enough accurate information to be genuinely threatening, but were phrased in such a paranoid, rambling way that they read like the work of someone with severe mental illness. Catherine's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started accusing neighbors of spying on her. She installed multiple security systems. She began carrying a recorder to document the harassment she was experiencing. The final stroke was brilliant in its simplicity. I sent a package to her house containing photographs of her and Dr. Morrison, along with a rambling letter claiming to be from my father's ghost, detailing how he was watching her from beyond and would make her pay for what she'd done to his daughter. Catherine's breakdown was spectacular. She called the police, sobbing hysterically about ghostly persecution and death threats from beyond the grave. When they asked for evidence, she showed them the letter and photographs, insisting that supernatural forces were targeting her family. The responding officers, faced with a middle-aged woman claiming to be haunted by her dead husband's vengeful spirit, recommended psychiatric evaluation. The reckoning. 3 months after my release from Greystone, I walked into family court with 4 thick folders of evidence, 3 court-appointed psychiatrists, and a legal team that could have represented small nations. My family sat across from me, each having been served with papers for involuntary psychiatric commitment evaluations. They looked shell-shocked, confused, and increasingly desperate as the evidence against them mounted. "Your Honor," my attorney began, "my client, Emma Matthews, was wrongfully committed to Greystone Asylum 5 years ago as part of an elaborate scheme to steal her inheritance. Today, we present evidence that the true individuals requiring psychiatric intervention are the very family members who orchestrated her commitment." The psychiatric evaluations were devastating. Dr. Peterson, the court-appointed specialist, had conducted extensive interviews with each family member. His findings read like a catalog of mental health disorders. Catherine Richardson, narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid features, severe anxiety disorder, and evidence of psychotic episodes involving persecution delusions and supernatural fixations. Recommended for immediate psychiatric treatment and evaluation of competency. Robert Richardson, impulse control disorder related to pathological gambling, severe depression with suicidal ideation, substance abuse disorder, and antisocial behavior patterns. Poses potential risk to self and others, recommended for involuntary commitment. Sarah Richardson, severe alcohol use disorder with dissociative episodes, anxiety disorder with agoraphobic tendencies, and evidence of self-harm behaviors. Requires immediate intervention and supervised treatment. Melissa Richardson, schizoaffective disorder, likely chronic, with auditory hallucinations and paranoid delusions. Condition appears to have been untreated for several years. Immediate psychiatric commitment recommended, but the most damaging evidence came from their own recorded words. Hours of audio documenting their conspiracy to have me wrongfully committed, their admission of perjury on the original commitment papers, their acknowledgement of financial fraud, and their systematic cover-up of their own mental health issues. "Miss Matthews," the judge said after reviewing the evidence, "can you explain how you were able to compile such comprehensive psychiatric assessments?" I stood, smoothing down my crisp business suit. "Your Honor, I spent 5 years at Greystone Asylum studying psychology and psychiatry. I used that education to conduct the same type of evaluation that was used to wrongfully commit me. The difference is my assessments are based on actual evidence rather than fabricated claims." Dr. Morrison, who'd been subpoenaed to testify, squirmed in his seat as the recordings of his affair with Catherine played for the courtroom. His medical license was suspended, pending investigation into his role in my wrongful commitment. "The irony," I continued, "is that my family taught me everything I needed to know about recognizing mental illness. They just didn't realize I was taking notes." Catherine's attorney tried one last desperate gambit. "Your Honor, Mrs. Richardson maintains that her stepdaughter is manipulating these proceedings. She claims Miss Matthews has somehow orchestrated these evaluations to appear mentally ill when they're actually fine." I smiled. "Your Honor, that claim itself demonstrates Mrs. Richardson's detachment from reality. She's suggesting that I somehow forced her to have an affair with Dr. Morrison, forced her husband to develop a gambling addiction, forced her daughter Sarah to abuse alcohol and prescription drugs, and forced her younger daughter Melissa to develop chronic hallucinations. This type of grandiose thinking and paranoid ideation is consistent with her diagnosed personality disorder." The judge banged his gavel. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I'm ordering immediate psychiatric evaluations for all 4 Richardson family members. Given the severity of the documented symptoms and the potential for harm to themselves or others, these evaluations will be conducted on an inpatient basis." Robert lunged toward me as the bailiffs approached. "You manipulative bitch! You planned all of this. You're the crazy one." "Mr. Richardson," I said calmly, "your aggressive behavior and paranoid accusations are being recorded for your psychiatric evaluation. You might want to consider how this outburst will look to your treating physicians." He stopped mid-lunge, suddenly aware that his reaction was only proving my point. Catherine sat in stunned silence as the reality hit her. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." "Mrs. Richardson," I said, walking over to her table, 5 years ago, you had me dragged from my bed in the middle of the night and committed to a mental institution based on lies. You stole my inheritance, destroyed my reputation, and left me to rot while you lived in luxury. Today, you're experiencing exactly what I experienced, except my evidence is real. Sarah was crying softly. Emma, please, we're family. No, I replied. Family doesn't do what you did to me. Family doesn't conspire to destroy someone they're supposed to love. Family doesn't commit perjury to steal an inheritance. Melissa was the only one who seemed genuinely confused. I don't understand what's happening. Who are all these people? Why is everyone so angry? My heart actually ached for her. Of all of them, she was the only one who was genuinely sick, rather than simply cruel. Melissa, you're going to get help now. Real help. The kind I should have received 5 years ago. As the psychiatric transport team arrived to escort my family to their evaluations, I gathered my files and walked toward the courtroom exit. Miss Matthews, the judge called after me. For someone who spent 5 years in psychiatric commitment, you display remarkable composure. Thank you, Your Honor. Greystone Asylum has an excellent library. I learned that the best revenge is simply giving people exactly what they deserve. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated kitchen of Richardson Manor, my father's house, reviewing the architectural plans for the estate's conversion into a residential treatment facility for young adults who'd been failed by the mental health system. The irony was delicious. The house they'd stolen would become a place where other victims like me could heal and rebuild their lives. Catherine remained at Hillcrest Psychiatric Hospital, her condition having deteriorated significantly once the structure of her lies collapsed. Her affair with Dr. Morrison had cost him his medical license and his marriage, and without her enabler, her narcissistic personality disorder manifested in increasingly severe ways. She'd convinced herself that she was being held captive by a conspiracy involving me, the hospital staff, and my father's ghost. Robert had been committed to the secure wing of Riverside Mental Health after a violent episode where he'd attacked an orderly he believed was cheating at cards. His gambling addiction and depression had spiraled into full-blown paranoid psychosis. He spent his days convinced that loan sharks had infiltrated the hospital staff. Sarah had been released after 4 months of intensive treatment, but she'd moved across the country to live with relatives, unable to face the reality of what her family had done. She sent me a letter apologizing for her role in my commitment and expressing gratitude that I'd forced her to get help for her addiction. She was 3 months sober and working as a recovery counselor. Melissa was the success story. With proper medication and therapy, her schizoaffective disorder was well managed. She'd been transferred to a long-term care facility that specialized in her condition and was doing well enough to take college classes online. She'd even started painting again. Beautiful, coherent works that no longer contained the disturbing imagery that had characterized her psychotic episodes. I visited her every month. Emma, she'd said during our last visit, I'm sorry I didn't help you before. I knew something was wrong with what they did, but I was so sick I couldn't think straight. You were a child, Melissa, and you were ill. None of this was your fault. Are you happy now? She'd asked. I'd thought about that question for a long time. Was I happy? I'd achieved everything I'd set out to accomplish. My family was receiving the mental health treatment they'd needed all along. I'd recovered my inheritance and more. The lawsuit against Dr. Morrison and the hospital had netted me millions in damages. I was financially secure for life and had the resources to help others who'd been wrongfully committed. But happy? I wasn't sure I remembered what happiness felt like. Until I received the letter. It was from a young man named David, whose sister had read about my case in the news. She'd been committed by their parents when she was 18 after reporting their father for sexual abuse. The parents had convinced everyone she was having delusions and making up stories for attention. Dear Miss Matthews, the letter began, my sister Amy is trapped the same way you were. Our parents had her committed 3 years ago to cover up Dad's abuse. She's been trying to get out ever since, but no one believes her. I've been researching your case, and I think you might be able to help us. I'd started getting letters like David's every week after my story broke. Young women, and some men, who'd been wrongfully committed by family members who wanted to silence them, steal from them, or cover up their own crimes. The mental health system, I'd learned, was surprisingly easy to manipulate if you knew the right things to say and appeared to be a concerned family member. And there were hundreds, maybe thousands, of victims like me, trapped in the very institutions that were supposed to help them. That's when I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I enrolled in law school with a focus on mental health advocacy. My LSAT scores were off the charts. Apparently, 5 years of reading psychiatric journals and legal texts while committed had been excellent preparation. I was fast-tracked into a joint JD PhD program in clinical psychology. The Emma Matthews Foundation for Mental Health Justice opened its doors 6 months after my family's commitments were finalized. Our legal team specialized in wrongful commitment cases, and our clinical staff provided support for victims who'd been abused by the very system meant to protect them. Our first successful case was David's sister, Amy. It took 8 months of legal battles, but we proved that her commitment had been fraudulent and that her father's abuse was real. Amy was released and her father was arrested. She was our foundation's first scholarship recipient for college. Standing in my father's study, now my office, I looked at the wall of framed photographs. Not family photos, but pictures of our clients. Young people who'd been wrongfully committed and were now free. Students who'd gone to college on foundation scholarships. Graduates who'd become advocates themselves. Each photo represented a victory against a system that had failed them. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Henley at Greystone. "Emma, I have someone I think you should meet. 18-year-old girl committed by her stepfather after she discovered he was embezzling from her trust fund." Sound familiar? I smiled, grabbing my car keys. "On my way," I texted back. As I walked through the halls of what had once been my prison, I realized that I'd found something better than happiness. I'd found purpose. Every wrongfully committed person I helped was a small victory against the system that had nearly destroyed me, and every victory was revenge against everyone who'd ever thought they could silence someone by calling them crazy. The young woman waiting in Dr. Henley's office looked exactly like I had 5 years ago. Scared, angry, and desperate to be believed. Her file contained the same lies I'd seen in my own commitment papers. Delusional claims about financial impropriety, paranoid accusations against family members, potential for violence. "Hello, Jessica," I said, sitting down across from her. "My name is Emma Matthews, and I think we need to talk." Her eyes widened in recognition. "You're the woman from the news, the one who got her family committed." "I'm the woman who proved my family was actually insane while I was just inconvenient." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. "Now tell me about your stepfather and this trust fund." As Jessica began her story, so similar to my own it could have been copied, I thought about how my family had unintentionally given me the greatest gift imaginable. They'd taught me that the line between sanity and insanity wasn't about mental illness at all. It was about power and truth and justice. They'd taken away my freedom, but they'd given me something far more valuable: the knowledge and skills to make sure no one else would suffer the way I had. In the end, their methods had indeed made them insane. Insane enough to think they could destroy me and get away with it. They'd forgotten the most important rule of psychological manipulation: never teach your victim how the game is played. Because eventually, they'll learn to play it better than you.